Hey, welcome back to the SBP podcast, Mobile Filmmaking. I'm your host, Susie Botello, and this is episode 149. Hey, I am here with our new guest, someone who's never been on the SBP podcast before, but that we know very well because Jason Rivera, a music composer, who was in our film festival this year. Jason is in LA. Jason came to the film festival to represent Connor Geary, who made a short film called Help Wanted, and he composed the music for that film. Jason, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on.
Hey, thanks for coming on the show.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate you, especially on a late night.
It's all good. It's nice and quiet.
Yeah.
Ish in LA.
It's like crickets. Jason, I'm really excited about you being on the show because I think the listeners are going to love everything, that you have to bring for them. I think it's really inspirational that you score film. Should I say this? You compose, you're a composer, right? But you score music for films. And it's a very integral part of filmmaking and mobile filmmaking. And it's a great opportunity for our listeners to contact you and get to know what you do, why you do it, and why it's so important. And I want them to contact you if they are thinking about making a feature film or any film, quite honestly, if they can, and hire you to make their music. And one of the reasons I'm saying that, Jason, is because I listened to, we're going to share that with our listeners as well, but I listened to some of your music. And what is the name of that one song that you have, which made a really, really nice impression on me on your demo reel? It's one that starts up. For some reason, it reminded me of Top Gun.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure which. Could you hum it?
No, I don't have. I'm not that talented. Actually, I think it was called Beam.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I don't know why it reminded me of the opening scene of Top Gun, the Mavericks one.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. I don't always use guitars in compositions the way I did on that piece, but one of my inspirations for that actually was Ennio Morricone films. Oh. His scores, especially for the spaghetti western films. He featured guitars a lot, and so I hadn't tried that before. So I thought it would be just kind of fun and interesting to use guitar in that way in a composition. But yes, Top Gun, that original main theme features electric guitar all over it. Yep. So I could see that connection.
Yeah, and it has a very cinematic, and very emotional, in a way, kind of feeling to it. It's it's my favorite one, just so that you know.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. There's another one there that's also really good, and I mean all of them are good. You're like, what about the rest?
Thank you.
But speaking of guitars, I wanted to, first of all, how did I want to talk because your dad was a guitarist. He was a bassist, right?
Mm-hmm. He played in salsa bands,
right? And
in the New York area.
I was going to bring the salsa up, as my favorite, because of not having anything to do with that. But, I'm a fish taco girl, so. You didn't see that coming, did you? But I wanted to talk about your dad and growing up, in the music. Guys, we're talking right now to a prodigy. because he started writing and making music when he was 4 years old. Jason,
I did.
that's an incredible story we're going to have to speak to. But let's talk a little bit about how we met and why. If you want to talk about, this film with Connor Geary, because he reached out to you somehow, right?
Yeah, we actually we met through something that takes place in LA every year. It's a collaboration filmmakers challenge, and I had done it for the first time last year, and so we connected through that. It's a 2-week filmmaking challenge.
Oh.
It was a lot of fun, a lot of pressure, and so he reached out to me and remotely, because he's in Indiana and I'm in LA.
Yeah.
And he just asked me if I'd be interested in working with him, and I checked out an earlier short film that he did, and I liked it. I thought it was a really interesting film. So I said yes. And I actually started writing the score for that short based on the script and a conversation that I had with Connor on the phone about the film. So he was in production while I had started the score on my own out here in LA. And then, so I had, did a bunch of work on it. And then finally, I received the footage from Connor. It was locked. And then I went back in and, made some tweaks and changes to what I had already done based on the script. Then we had maybe 1 or 2 rounds of small changes, little tweaks to the score, and it was done. It was a really fun and a nice collaboration.
Like the music. The music was light, as well. For Help Wanted, which was a unique little story. I'll read. You know what? I'm going to read the synopsis.
Okay.
A young boy learns about kindness and generosity, not from what his dad says, but from what he does. And it's a touching story. I remember when I first saw it after he submitted it, and I was like, "Oh my God, I love the message, in the story,
Yeah.
and the way that he tells it. The film itself, the cinematography for it, was actually really nice.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, and then he has his son is in the film, right?
Yep.
And he is in the film, right?
Briefly at the end in the end credits. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a great little film, and it got a really nice reaction at the film festival. And I'm hoping that Connor and his son are listening. And Connor, congratulations! It was a great film, and people loved it. And I have to also thank Connor for allowing you to come. I'm not sure exactly how that happened. I think I may have said something like, well, if you can't come, if you want to send someone, or maybe he suggested it. But it was great that you came to our film festival this year, Jason.
Thank you.
Everybody liked you, and you liked everybody. So
Yeah, no, it was a great event, great festival.
yeah, and so you were a part of the family there during that weekend.
Yeah, and I felt that. I felt that from everybody, and especially from you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Well, I had never, the only person in that festival, of all the filmmakers and participants really that I had met before in person, was Levi Austin Morris.
Okay.
And everybody else was new to each other and me. And so,
wow.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, there was just a great energy and so much great work featured in the program. And just, I don't know, it was such a supportive festival.
Yeah. I think that's really what it comes down to, It's a support of each other because that's what you hope to get in a film festival, because that support leads to collaboration with
Yeah.
each other later. And there were a lot of you, like we're going to discuss here. I mean, you're a professional at what you do, and this is part of the benefit of attending a film festival and meeting people like you. Is like, hey, you have, someone in the industry who's a professional that can, you guys can. It's a win-win, basically.
Yeah, it is.
So let's talk a little bit about you now. If you don't mind. You don't mind, do you?
Sure. That's all right.
Jason, why don't you tell us, because we're going to start very early, like when you were 4 years old. You're from Puerto Rico?
My parents were both born there.
Yeah.
I was born in New Jersey.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Where's that accent? New Jersey.
Sometimes if I've had a drink, it'll come out. I've been told.
So your parents. So you were born in New Jersey, and your father was a guitarist. Did he play in a band? Well, go ahead and share your story.
Sure. Well, he played in salsa bands. He played the upright bass in salsa bands on the East Coast, New Jersey, New York area. And I've heard some of those recordings when I was a teenager, and they're pretty exceptional. Some of the bands that he was in during that time. So, and actually one of my brothers is also studied as a musician. And he and I even played in a band at one point many years ago. But growing up, we always had instruments in the house, basses, guitars, upright pianos. So it just was like part of the environment that I grew up in. And there's also this thing every Christmas in Puerto Rican culture where it's, like a Puerto Rican version of caroling, but there's very specific songs.
Oh, yes.
That are played.
Yeah,
The parandas, they're called. And so it's just part of my family and the culture that I grew up in. And so, naturally, I was always super curious about all the instruments in our home and trying them out and making sounds with them. But also, like, even before that, I just always heard music in my head. Wow. And from the time I was a toddler, I can remember that far back. And I think some people just have music with them all the time. And I thought that was kind of weird maybe at one point in my life, but then I heard some other musicians saying a very similar thing. That's like this field that's always been around them. Music has just always been around them since they were kids.
And they even defined the sounds around them as musical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So I was just one of those people, from the time I was a small kid. And so I was lucky to have all those instruments around and music around me and musicians around me. And I also, at one point, had a Fisher-Price tape recorder, which for me, that was my first studio. Wow. That's how I think of it. Because on that little tape recorder, I'd hear these chord progressions and stuff and melodies in my head, and I would record them down from the time that I was, 4 or 5. So music's always been a part of my life. And that's just that's the background of how I got involved with it.
That is so. I forgot about those Fisher-Price recorders.
I think you can find them. I looked them up because I just wanted to see that thing's long gone. I don't remember what happened.
Well, they even had
mine,
cameras now that I'm,
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, there was I'm just now remembering there was a filmmaker in 2013. There was a filmmaker in our film festival. I think they won second prize. and they did this thing with puppets. And the guy said I had always been experimenting with different cameras, and that's why he made one on a phone, on an iPhone. But he said I once made a short little film on a Fisher Price camera. And I was like, oh, that's I don't think I want to have a film festival for Fisher Price cameras. But yeah, you just reminded me of that. And
That's super cool.
yeah. So Fisher Price, man.
I didn't know about that.
They're like the Apple of toys, right?
Exactly.
Creativity.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. So it was obviously it was embedded in your DNA as part of your family and your culture. And then at what point did you decide? I mean, obviously you're a kid, right? And then as you're growing up, it's just a part of you. At what point did you decide, well, this is a profession for me?
Well, so I always was involved with music, but I was also always drawing and painting. I always did both from the time I was a little kid. And then as I got older, wound up studying both in school from probably high school, as a freshman in high school. So I was taking music lessons, but also studying painting. And then did that into my early 20s. And then I think at some point, I just realized that I wanted to kind of go all in with music and really focus on it. It just kind of at that point, for some reason, stood out to me as the thing that I really wanted to dedicate myself to. And so I did. But even before that point, I played in bands. Like basically since I was a teenager, I was always in a band playing something, some instrument. And I toured as a late teenager, toured the U.S. in a band with my brother. But yeah, it wasn't until like about my early 20s where I decided to really focus on music, and then continued when I moved to LA, continued to play in bands as a guitarist and a piano player and a songwriter.
Nice.
And then at some point, I really started listening to a lot of film scores. I'm not even really sure why. I've always loved film music, especially like John Williams scores. I don't know, they have a special place for me. But yeah, I don't know. I just really started listening to a lot of film music, and so much so, like not always even having the time to watch the films, but like being really into the scores and absorbing them and studying them. And then that kind of led me into wanting to study more of composition and orchestration, to really learn how to use the orchestra. And that led me into, so I studied that privately with a composition orchestration teacher for quite a bit of time, and was also studying and learning how to use production software, music production software. And then I decided on a whim to take a class at UCLA in the film scoring program. And I just kind of fell in love with it. And then I realized that they had all these courses on orchestration and composition. And I was like, man, I actually did the film scoring certificate through UCLA, which is 53 credits.
Wow.
It's really intense. Yeah. And it was amazing. I got to write for live orchestras many, many times. And I'll always remember the first time that I wrote a piece that worked really well for an orchestra, and like the magical feeling that creates, to kind of be in a room with like, maybe 25 orchestral players playing your music that you wrote.
Yeah, that's got to be supreme.
It was pretty amazing. So I finished that program, and then kind of as I was taking that program, I just sort of kind of lost interest in performing and playing in bands. It just sort of happened naturally. and really focused on my composing work, and just getting better at it. And then when I finished that film scoring program, then I was like, okay, well, I learned all this amazing stuff and have all this great experience under my belt, and now I kind of want to use it in the real world. And so I started to just kind of, find opportunities to be able to write for film. And it's been snowballing from there.
I mean, it's quality stuff. When in the samples that these are classical music, orchestras, violins. The violins play a big part in a lot of emotional scenes. Tugging at the heartstrings, right? Things like that. And how are you able to compose those, or maybe walk us through the process of, let's say someone says, all right, Jason, I'm gonna give you $100,000 for my feature film. There's 3 really big scenes that I want you to focus on, right? They're really climatic scenes that I really, the rest, you could do the rest. But these 3 ones, these 3, the opening scene, this climax scene, and maybe down towards the end, I want you to make something really unique, really emotional, really, really raise the quality of those 3 scenes for me. What is your process for that?
Well, there's a couple of ways that I would go about doing that. So lately, like the last 4 out of the last 5 projects that I've scored, I wrote them all based on reading the script and some discussions with the directors of those projects. And it's a really collaborative way of scoring. So I find that it takes a little bit more imagination to write music based off of words on a page as opposed to film footage. But I really like working that way. So, if it was that kind of a process, it would be a discussion with the director and, reading the script. And I often like to talk to directors about colors. I want to, especially if I haven't seen any footage, like I want to know, what are you thinking about in terms of a color palette for this film?
Now that's interesting.
Yeah, because that actually really helps me with choices that I would make in terms of, chords and instrument choices.
Well, because I happen to know that when you're doing the color grading and the palettes and things like that, a lot of the films that have, say, a blue tone to it are more police, crime, dramas, things like that. The ones with the greens have more of sci-fi, aliens, spaceships, things like that. And so, that's a really interesting aspect, because I know they bring about, the tones bring about also the emotions and things like that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's really important.
And so it's, I can, just you mentioning the colors like that for scoring before you even see the footage, right?
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
It's really important. This is no disrespect, but I had a couple of directors kind of ask me, well, why do you need to know that? Or isn't that something like we should be thinking about like way later down the road?
It's all connected though.
But yeah, I mean, for me, especially if I'm writing based on the script, I want to know, what are you thinking in terms of the color world? It's really important information for me and what I do. Yeah. And then, but if I'm working off of, a locked picture or almost locked picture, it's a little bit of a different process, because at that point, it's been edited. Oh, go ahead.
Why don't we explain to people what locked means?
Good point. Thank you. So locked is just when, the bulk, either all or almost all of the edits have been done to the film, and it's, basically edited or, being close to being completely edited. And so usually no changes or very little changes would be made to the edit at that point.
Yeah, because the audio always is the last part of the process in post-production.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So if I'm working off of footage, especially something that's, almost finished in terms of the editing, then that footage, it has a rhythm to it. And the editor of that project, for me, is almost like a drummer. They're setting the tempo. Yeah. And so if I'm writing to footage, well, it's different because then I need to sit with it. I need to know, ideally, especially if I'm working on chunks of a film, I want to know, like, well, what happened in the previous scene? What's the next scene? That's important information for me.
The anticipation.
And then just watching the footage and seeing what I would even sometimes just listen, turn down the volume, all the dialogue down, so I could just watch the rhythm, the movements on the screen and the rhythm of the editing. And that would help me set up a tempo or, various tempos in a scene. So that's how I would approach a picture that's, something that's been filmed already. Now, if I have like the complete film, what I like to do actually is try and write the very last music first and figure that out. And the reason...
And what you mean by last, you mean at the end of the film?
Yeah, like write the most climactic music first.
Okay.
And then the rest of the preceding score would be leading up to that. And that's a really effective, I've done that on some projects, it's a really effective way to work because you kind of know where you're going. You know what the finish line is and what that's supposed to feel and sound like. And so you can kind of work backwards from that.
Because now you can figure out where you're coming from.
And you can also give little hints and little teasers in earlier music in that film, to just kind of cue people to where this story might be going. So those are, a couple different ways that I approach projects depending on the nature of the project. And I mean, if someone gave me $100K, I mean, that would be amazing. I would just,
I'm sitting here going, just take it into effect or to consider what you just mentioned. There's a lot of psychology in filmmaking. I'm always talking in storytelling in general, there's psychology. But in filmmaking, it's laid out for you. It's not like when you're reading a book, right? Or a story that's written, you're reading it and the reader is turning the words, right, into and the message creatively in their mind. It's their vision.
Right. Yep.
Right. And when you're listening to music, like I used to go to the back in the 90s, right? Go to the record stores and go through all the records. And they had, a lot of the movies, Alien even had its own record and CDs with their soundtrack.
Oh, yeah.
And I would go and listen to those because I wasn't going to buy those. I wanted my rock bands or whatever. But I would sit there and spend hours in their stores listening to those things. And it's a form of escape because then you can imagine a movie around it. Not the particular movie, just your own movie.
That is so
but
cool.
But in film, right, the director is producing, the filmmaker is producing a filmmaker with people like you involved It's all connected, you know, the color grading, the
Yeah.
colorist, the editor is working
Yep.
with you. You're working with them on set to create that footage. The actors, their expressions,
Yeah.
the pacing, everything is working together. And so you're a big part of that. And it's all psychological
Yeah.
in so many ways because that is the one medium where everything is laid out in front of you.
Mm.
As a viewer, you're just sitting there and you're transported into this world and
Yeah.
you don't understand why you get this that wasn't said.
Right.
But if you go and analyze it, there was that little violin chord, special chord that Jason showed you or you heard before, but you weren't really listening for
Yeah.
it. And he only plays it in particular moments with this one particular character
Mm-hmm.
who is doing this one habitual thing that leads to a clue to something at the end.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I mean, what you're alluding to, I think, is film composers really at the heart, they're storytellers.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big leap for me to make in my understanding because I come from playing in bands and songwriting, it took me quite a bit of time to understand, first of all, this is when you're working on a film, this is somebody's project and they may have spent years to get to
It's
the
their
point.
baby.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a parallel though, I think, in having worked with and collaborated with other songwriters. There's a parallel, I think, between songwriters and directors, filmmakers, where, I worked on some songwriting projects where the other person I was collaborating with, their idea was so good. And so my goal as a collaborator in those situations was how could I enhance what's already there and not ruin it?
Yeah.
And having just respect for songwriting. And so there's something similar, I think, in a way with filmmakers where, like you said, it's their baby. And so just I had to make that jump, though, that mental leap between, being a songwriter, composer, where you just kind of do whatever you want, whatever your heart and imagination desires, to, okay, now actually it's not that, there's a story here and I'm really in my role, I'm part of the storytelling team. And every choice, every decision that I make has to enhance that story, support that story.
And you're adding texture to the movie, to the story.
Definitely. Yeah. I think where one of the great ways that I learned about that was when I was studying film scoring in school. We watched the first 5 or 10 minutes of Jaws with no music.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just, it kind of looks like a tourism video. There's just nothing really happening on the screen, really.
Yeah.
And then, kind of A-Bing it with then the actual score. And you realize just how important of an element, not to oversell it, but it's really a big element.
No, we did that. We did that in one of my classes too.
Yeah.
It must be a real popular thing to do with instructors. Just do that with Jaws out of all of
That's
them.
funny. I've never met
Yeah.
anyone else that had done that in school. That's so cool.
Yeah, it was in my cinematography class.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. I'm glad that they were showing you all in the class.
Because it's like what you were talking about. It's the juxtaposition of different shots together create a pace and a rhythm. And the anticipation with the dun-dum, dun-dum. And they're going back and forth. They're showing you the shark. Then they're going back to showing you the little kid on the floater thing.
Yeah.
Go back to the shark, the people on the beach. And it's this little thing between them where I guess if you're listening to an orchestra, right, it's like one instrument, and then another one, and then another one comes in, and it just kind of builds up.
Yep. Yeah. And it also makes me think about, I had heard somewhere that sometimes a bad film can be saved by a good score but I think the
Yes.
reverse is also true. The wrong music,
Unfortunately.
the wrong music in a film, could take away from it for sure. But thinking about Jaws, that's an interesting story around that too, because I guess Steven Spielberg was having a lot of trouble with that shark.
Mm-hmm. Well, it tore up somebody. In the first scene.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So in the first scene, the woman that goes into the water, the girl,
Mm-hmm.
They're at night and she goes into the water. Oh, let's go swimming.
Right. Yeah.
It's in the middle of the night.
Right. Yeah.
Well, apparently they were yanking on her leg from this end and that end, and apparently they yanked on her leg and broke her leg or something like that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was and so the screaming was like real.
Wow.
She was really in pain.
Wow.
So
that's intense.
Yeah,
But I didn't know that. But I had heard that they had. Well, that might have been part of the trouble that they had with that shark. But I guess they didn't have it on set to use for, and they were on a schedule, obviously, a shooting schedule. So he really relied on the score to help tell that story. Because a lot of
You've
scenes...
gone to Universal Studios, right?
Actually, I haven't.
I mean, yeah, because, so the Jaws thing, it's part of the tour.
Right.
And I think I was like 9 or something when I first went there and I saw that and I was so disappointed. I was like, it looks like paper mache or something. It was just like, are you serious? That's it?
Oh, man. No, I need to get there, though. Although, that's... do they still have
my favorite theme park.
Is that ride still there?
I'm pretty sure it's been there for like 150 years.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's like,
Cool.
it's been there forever. Universal Studios they had a fire. I forgot what year they had a fire in, but they had a fire, and I remember the Back to the Future was that part was burned. I don't know if they brought it back.
Yeah,
I used to go there and watch the Terminator 2 show and sit at the front row because the Arnold Schwarzenegger guy with the motorcycle comes up at the end. And then there's this white mist, right? Which is, just, it just covers up the room in white. And you hold your breath because you feel like you just got like sprayed with this white mist. It's like, it's for an effect. Everything turns white and there's this big boom, this big sound, right? We're talking about sound, guys. There's a connection here. And when you're sitting in that front row, it blows at you and it just hits you so hard. I'm weird, okay? I love stuff like that. And so I would make sure after I went the first time, I had one of those annual passes for like 3 years in a row.
Nice.
And I would go there like once a month and just go sit at the front row and watch that. That and Waterworld I didn't care for the movie, the Kevin Costner movie, the water thing, but the exhibit, they have an airplane that crashes in the water and splashes you. It's just so awesome.
Sounds fun.
You really got to get there, guys.
I do, yeah. I need to.
Yeah. So Jason, I just want to talk a little bit about the storytelling part because we barely touched on it. And, they say half the story is sound. And I think part of that sound is the music, and it's also part of the special effects.
Yep.
A special effect, you can do it until you're blue in the face. But it has, without sound, it really doesn't have an effect.
That's true. That's true. I think I've been encouraging directors that I work with, or, we're having discussions about potentially working together. It's part of the thing I've been encouraging them to do is to start to collaborate with me early in their process. If we're touching base and connecting before, filming, is to get them thinking about music like ASAP, early in the process. Because, well, for one thing, it helps me do what I do. to kind of help them. If they don't have a clear idea of what they want with the music, then I need to kind of tease that out with them to help them figure that out. And it's such an important part of the process that I think to leave it to the end, almost like an afterthought, I think it's a missed opportunity in terms of your storytelling. So I'm really encouraging people that I work with, and people seem really, a lot of people, directors lately that I've been chatting with and working with, they're not used to having score written before anything's been filmed. Like, this is kind of something new to most directors and filmmakers, but even if they're not okay with that or not interested in working in that way, just to get them thinking about the music early in the process, I think is good, because it's part of the storytelling.
Mm-hmm. It really is. I mean, as you know, I watch a lot of films.
Yeah.
And a lot of films, especially now, right? Because we're talking about mobile filmmaking, but mobile filmmaking is independent filmmaking, really. I mean, it's you saw the films at the film festival. There were no bad films.
Yeah, it was a great program.
And yeah, I mean, you saw the rookie films, even the ones from the most novice filmmakers, right?
Yeah.
They were incredible.
They were very inspiring.
And so to now be at this, this pace where I'm watching films, and every film, right, that gets selected and that gets into the program is pretty good. However, they could all, the production value, the value of that film could be increased, right, with really good film scoring.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think I saw a program recently here in LA, and there was one film in particular, and it's probably just because of who I am and what I do. I'm really tuned into listening to a film.
Yeah.
And the piece of music that was used in this particular film, it was a short, was actually, I thought, a good piece of music, and I think it worked well, but the production on it was extremely distracting for me. I don't know, maybe it's something that, a casual viewer wouldn't notice, but it kind of took me out of the film. And I don't know why, but I later discovered that the director of the film also did the music. So even just the production side of scoring, I think, has to be done with a lot of care. And it's something that I spend a lot of time, when I have the time, if I have the time on a project, to, not to say to get it perfect, but just to get it to be as good as I can, as I know it can be. Because even if you're writing appropriate music for a scene or a film, it also has to be produced well. So that's a whole other kind of technical thing.
Yeah, because you can get away with something, right? And that's not the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing if it's intentional, like intentionally lo-fi. It's a choice, and I feel like I can tell when that's a choice or when it's just.
It's very hard, Jason. I did video production for so long, right? I learned to separate myself from stuff I shot.
Yeah, that's good.
Because, and I forced myself to separate, to not judge something and criticize something based on who shot it. I used to work with different camera people, and I used to also be a media manager, and I was in charge of thousands and thousands of tapes, little mini DV tapes, and then we would digitize them, and then we were getting, HD, digital files and all those things together. And I would have to label them, organize them, all these things.
Wow.
And then I would have to pick and choose for different editing pieces that I would edit for to be a part of another, production.
Okay.
Right. And so it would be, oh, this is some footage that so-and-so shot of this particular, say you're making a documentary, showing the progress of this event, this story. And we would grab from this and that and different times, different years, different people recording it,
Right.
Capturing the footage. And I would have to somehow put this all together. And some of it was mine, right?
Uh-huh.
And I was able to finally force myself to say, even though I shot this, that doesn't make it good. I don't see it with the eye of look how good it is or look how bad that is, because it can work both ways.
Definitely.
It just matters to the story and the intention. When you're editing, you have to have intention. When you're making a movie and you're telling a story, you have to have intention. If you don't have the intention, everything is just sort of like Jell-O.
Yep.
It's just,
You're just
sort of mushed together. There it is.
Yeah. And from what I do, you're just kind of guessing. You're just kind of hoping, this or that'll work, And there's certainly a part of the process is intuitive, and at least for me, it's intuitive. But there's also, like you said, it needs to be a balance between intuition and intent.
Yeah. And it's hard because there, also film is a science, but it's art.
Music's the same way.
Those two things together, right? Because music, art, even all art, there's a science to all art, because when you're thinking about it as a creator, right, of that, it's always, it's like it. I don't mean intent in that sense. The science part is the intent, and the art part is the, what you call your intuition. It's the heart of it. It's the expression, the, whatever, let me splash that there. Oh, look, that worked.
Yeah.
There's the other part that goes in and says that actually fits. And we've all experienced that with music or film or anything, where you do something and you drop it there and it actually works, and you're like, I'm leaving it. And that's the intention.
Yeah, and you mentioned science, and there's a lot of math too in music, for sure.
And I hate math.
I never liked math until I really got deep into composing and music theory, and then it just sort of all clicked for me. But
that's why I would hire you.
But yeah, there's quite a bit of math actually, and even in film scoring. But that, like you were talking about intentionality, and that's something that I try to bring to a project from the first choice that I make all the way to the last choice that I make in the last cue that I write. So like I start my whole writing process really intentional. And that's why I kind of try to tease as much information about a project that I'm working on from the director. I want to know about colors. I want to know backstories. I want to read the script, because that's all the information that's going to help me make better choices as a film composer. And so, yeah, I'm just very intentional about my process. It's all I don't really talk to the directors about it. And I feel like if you do it right, you don't need to, because the thing just works. The cue just works in the scene, and they're just happy with it. And certainly I think for me now, scoring is also very intuitive. Like I could just drop a piece of like, film in front of me, a scene, and I've done it enough times now that it's very intuitive, like what I need to do, which is a cool feeling because it
Yes.
wasn't always like that for me. It took a number of projects before I got to that point. And then one day I was just working on a project. I was like, oh, it's intuitive, the film scoring process. But even with that, like it's still very intentional for me in the choices that I make, and in even things like the keys that I choose to write in, the key signatures, and any changes that I make to different keys. Like it's all very intentional. But all of those things are in service of the story that we're working on.
Yeah, I think that's actually, I've had a conversation with different guests. Well, many conversations with different guests. But I remember, I think it was the art school dropouts, Joey Ming, who said basically, once you learn all the technicalities of working with a camera and working on a film, right, on a video or whatever it is, after you've done it so many times, you don't have to think about what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to think about it in detail.
Yeah.
And you begin to trust your intuition because the intent, going back to what we're talking about, the intent doesn't always have to be a conscious thing.
Yeah.
And that's where you come in. You're talking about math and all these things and the experience of what you just said of doing it so many times that you can trust your intuition, but you do it with intent, but you don't have to think about it all the time.
Yeah.
It just works. That's what makes you a professional.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
And that comes with experience.
It does, yeah.
And that's really inspiring, Jason.
Well, thanks. I'm glad it is. I mean, yeah, like you said, you get to a point where it's intuitive, but I think also part of, for me anyway, allowing that intuition to sometimes take the front seat in my process is because I feel like I'm really entrenched in the story that I'm working on.
That's
and
it.
So it's already in my subconscious. And so I know whether this instrument is the right choice or not,
Yeah. And like a story, you know what should be happening before this other thing happens. And the very basics of a story, right? On a timeline. You don't have somebody getting out of the car before somebody gets in the car, right? You don't have the car moving forward without stepping on the gas pedal.
Right.
Just little things like that. And I know these are like the silliest examples, but you could have that in any other thing. But when you have all these pieces in front of you, like a puzzle, your mind just goes, wow, how am I supposed to find a story to that? And that's kind of like what happens to an editor or a composer with all the tools available, all the stuff that you have available to you. But after you do it so many times, it's like, well, I know this goes here, this goes there. This used to happen to me in video production, Jason.
Yeah, I bet.
It was like people just throw all this stuff at me, and I was like, all right, what are we doing? What's the story?
Right.
And then let's put the story together. And sometimes you're just throwing things around and you're going, oh, I can see the story now.
Yeah.
And things just kind of fall together.
Absolutely.
And I can see why the directors that you work with, like you said, they're happy with it. They don't need to know the math.
Right.
They just know it sounds good, it fits well, and it does what the music is supposed to do. It makes them feel something when they're watching the film.
Yeah. And also when it's a situation where the director knows my previous work, has heard it and seen it, then, ideally they would be hiring me because they like what I do and they think that what I do could enhance their project. And so usually the films that come out the best and the scores that come out the best from me are the ones where the director hires me and he's like, do your thing.
Yeah.
You know, just run with it. And I'm the one that's like, hey, can we have a spotting session, please? You know, because I just want to make sure I do the right thing. And I want to, you know, I respect your project and want to do the best that I can on it. But when I can have that leeway, that creative leeway, because I'm going to do my research and I'm going to read my script, you know, I'm going to do all the things that I do anyway. So it's really been really nice. Most of my projects I've had, just the director really trusts me from the beginning of the process. And it's a good feeling. And I think I actually do better work in those situations.
Of course.
You know? And it's sort of like, well, if you don't trust me and you're not really into what I'm doing, I'm probably not the right person for this project, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm cool with that. And I'm actually really forthcoming in terms of, you know, I think you need to have the right person to execute your vision, to help you execute the vision that you're going for, you know?
Yeah, nervous people make mistakes. Nervous people are just too conscious.
Yeah.
You know, too subconscious. You know, too like blah.
Yeah.
You know, and you're not going to get the best from people if they're sort of scared or uncomfortable or nervous. You know, I can walk from here to the kitchen with a glass of water filled to the rim if I'm comfortable with it and I'm okay with it and not afraid to drop it. But as soon as I'm nervous about it, I'm going to trip over every little thing that's along the way that water is getting spilled.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and that's the other thing where when people working, because like I keep saying, it's all connected. It's all for that story, for the effect, you know, and the effect is that you take the viewer, they fall into this story and they don't come out until you want them to come out.
Yeah.
And the message that rolls around in their head afterwards, you know, for days working this thing out, you know, or just thinking about it and connecting it to their own stories and feelings and things like that, that's all intentional.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and that's a part of it. And that is, you know, the magic of filmmaking sometimes just happens when everything is falling into place because people are working hard to make that happen in all aspects of it.
Yeah.
You know, and I think, like what I was saying before, so many movies that I see, not just in my film festival, but everywhere, that could be so much better if they hired Jason Rivera.
I appreciate that.
It's a great segue to end this too. Is there anything else that you think we need to share?
I was going to share something, you know, having been to your festival in April and having had that experience, it made me think, because I studied fine art and painting, like I mentioned earlier, in school, and art history. And I remember studying about photography and how it was not accepted as a serious art form in the beginning. And because, you know, paintings and etchings and drawing, obviously, for centuries were kind of the accepted modes of expression in visual art.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah. And so when photography came along, it took decades. I learned this in school.
Because it was just like a mechanical thing.
Yeah. It's just...
No one was looking at the output. They're looking at the thing.
And people
the tool.
weren't taking it seriously as a fine art form. And so, you know, now, like, you go to a museum and you kind of take it for granted. Like, you know, there's photography here. It's another medium, you know. And I was thinking about how there's, at least in my mind, maybe some kind of parallel to mobile filmmaking, where maybe some people are kind of just so focused on the tool and not willing to accept the art that came out of using that tool, and just thinking like, hopefully, maybe who knows how long it'll take, but just I was thinking about a parallel between the early days of photography in the fine art world and mobile filmmaking in the filmmaking world, and just seeing kind of like a connection there. So hopefully mobile filmmaking will have a similar path to photography. Maybe in 5-10 years, it'll be such a common thing, and a common tool that's used in the filmmaking world that, people don't even give it a second thought to use it. So I don't know.
Yeah. So for me, so from 2009 to 2023 feels like it's been 100 years. And I'm still pushing for this. And now we're going into the 13th year next April, which, by the way, you guys, submissions are open. Submit your features and your smartphone photos and your short films.
Yeah.
And we even have a short screenplay contest as well.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, because of the story part.
Right.
And guys, if you have a screenplay, you have a product that you can share with friends and even people like Jason and say, this is what I want to make.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Don't just talk about making a film. Show them the film that you want to make and bring people on board.
Absolutely.
To help you make that happen. So, yeah, we're going on 13 years. And a couple of years ago in the summer around this time, I wrote a thing and I said, hey, feature films have reached, shot on a phone, have reached the mainstream.
Yeah.
Because you can see them on Amazon and Tubi.
Mm-hmm.
You can see them, some special people get to have their film on Netflix. Steven Soderbergh shot with a phone. But we're really independent filmmaking.
Yeah.
Is what smartphone filmmaking is. More and more independent filmmakers are using the smartphone cameras. And I've watched from people who were giving me a hard time about it before open up now and say, yeah, actually I'm willing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as they're willing to do it, they're not going to criticize it like they would before.
Yeah.
Because they see the benefits of it. And you know what brought that on, Jason? The pandemic. Because people were basically blocked from making films.
Right.
They couldn't do it. And so they thought, well, what if I made a film on my phone with a few people or by myself even?
That's awesome.
And they realized, here we are.
It's a silver lining, I guess, right?
Yeah. So Jason, be prepared. I hope that some of you out there who are making feature films want to up your game, up the production value of your film, and contact Jason. Look, I was only kidding. Jason's not going to charge you $100,000. But he's definitely worth $100,000. And all you have to do is listen to his demo reels. And especially that song that I really like a lot, Beam, right? Is that what it was called?
I really appreciate that, Susie.
Yeah, you bet. Jason, where can people find you?
Well, if you want to listen to my music, you can go to my website, jasonriveramusic.com. And you can connect with me on there too, my socials on my website. So it's the best way to do it.
Yeah. All right, do this one thing. I do this one thing at the end. Say goodbye to our listeners.
All right, everybody. If you're a filmmaker or you're thinking about a filmmaker, becoming a filmmaker, please submit to the International Mobile Film Festival. It's an awesome festival, a lot of fun, great people. And with that, thank you so much, Susie, for having me on here.
Thank you, Jason.